There we are.
Great. Over to me.
Over to you.
Thank you very much, Catherine, and good evening, everybody. I'm going to try and share my screen, which is fairly important for the success of this enterprise. So hopefully that's worked. Can you all see a screen? Of course, you're all muted, so you may not be able to tell me that, but hopefully so.
That's fine.
Okay. Well, as we meet together this evening, I counted, and I think it's the 22nd day of Lent. Quite a long time, isn't it? It's 40 days to be in the wilderness that long. And what I wonder was Jesus actually doing all that time? John's Gospel won't help us very much with that question, as John's Gospel doesn't mention Jesus's time in the wilderness at all. Matthew and Luke each describe Jesus encountering Satan, who tempts him in 3 different ways. Intriguingly, while the temptations are the same in those Gospels, they're in a different order, but that's a topic for another time, perhaps. And then there's Mark's Gospel, which, as I said in my Evensong sermon last Sunday, devotes a single sentence to those 40 days, but it's a pretty good sentence. Jesus was in the wilderness 40 days, tempted by Satan, and he was with the wild beasts, and the angels waited on him. Mark doesn't go into further detail about Jesus's temptations, but he does have that intriguing reference to the wild beasts and indeed the angels. And we're going to see a few beasts this evening in the Spencer paintings. I don't know how much time you spent thinking about what Jesus was doing all those 40 days in the wilderness, but I suspect most of us think of him as being very much alone, apart from those encounters with Satan. Maybe something like in this, let's see if this works. Yes, okay. Like this 19th century painting by Ivan Kramskoy, Christ in the Wilderness. So here we've got a very pensive and thoughtful Jesus perched on a rather uncomfortable looking rock in a desolate and bare landscape. And the way Jesus is depicted, it sits 4 square with the slightly dubious pale Galilean tradition of Western art, with his shoulder-length brown hair, slender physique, and whitish complexion. But before we go any further, I'm going to suggest that we hear that verse from Mark's Gospel once more, but in the context of the slightly longer passage from the Gospels. So I shall just read that. Actually, one of the hazards of this is, of course, all the pictures are actually covering up part of the text, but I'm sure I'll cope with that one way or another. So, Mark's Gospel, chapter 1, verses 9 to 14. In those days, Jesus came from Nazareth of Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. And just as he was coming up out of the water, he saw the heavens torn apart and the Spirit descending like a dove on him. And a voice came from heaven, "You are my Son, the beloved. With you I am well pleased." He was with the wild beasts, and the angels waited on him. Now, after John was arrested, Jesus came to Galilee, proclaiming the good news of God and saying, "The time is fulfilled, and the kingdom of God has come near. Repent and believe in the good news." Well, this evening I've chosen to focus on the work of a 20th century artist who produced 8 paintings of Christ in the Wilderness, Stanley Spencer. You obviously know that from my title. So I showed one of Spencer's self-portraits. In that opening slide, here are 3. The Jesus of Spencer's wilderness paintings retains the beard and to some extent the robe of Kramskoy's paintings, but his portrayal is very, very different and gives a much fuller picture of what Jesus might have been doing during those 40 days. As I say, what you see on the screen now are 3 self-portraits. This is not the time for a full Spencer biography, but I think I just need to give a little bit of background as a sort of way into the 8 paintings. I'm sure many of you will know much of this, but I shall go through it pretty quickly. Stanley Spencer was born in Kokum in Berkshire in 1891. He was the 8th surviving child of William and Anna Caroline Spencer. His father was a music teacher and church organist. Stanley was educated at home by his sisters Annie and Florence, as his parents had reservations about the local council school but couldn't afford private education. He and his brother Gilbert did take drawing lessons from a local artist, Dorothy Bailey. Spencer did go on to spend some time at Maidenhead Technical Institute, where his father insisted he should not take any exams. And then from 1908 to 1912, Spencer studied at the Slade School of Fine Art in London. So profound was his attachment to his hometown of Kokum that he would often take the train back home in time for tea, apparently on an almost daily basis. His experience during the First World War was pivotal to his life and his worldview. He served in Macedonia with the 68th Field Ambulance Unit and then the Berkshire Regiment. And the impact of these war experiences may be seen to spectacular effect in the Sander Memorial Chapel, just south. Oh, goodness, what happened there? That's what I meant to do. Yes, okay. At the Sander Memorial Chapel, just south of Newbury, about an hour's drive from where I'm sitting now, well worth a visit. I'm sure many of you will have been there. Spencer worked on that project for no less than 6 years, between 1926 and 1932. And in February, oh goodness, how'd you go backwards in these presentations? That's, yeah. Whoops. Apologies with me sorting out my PowerPoint presentation. I've jumped on too many slides. That's better. Okay. And in February 1927, Spencer held his first solo exhibition, and the centerpiece of this was what I suspect is still his most famous painting, the Resurrection Kokum. The setting is the grounds of Holy Trinity Kokum, and the subject is not the resurrection of Christ, but the general resurrection of the dead at the second coming. And here we see a company of Kokum residents, including friends and family, amongst them Spencer's first wife, Hilda Carline, emerging from graves in the presence of Christ and the saints. And here you can sense the intense Christian mysticism that Spencer rooted in his hometown. Some find it overly whimsical, sentimental even, but for me this is unfair. But then so many reactions to art are highly subjective. Hilda, in fact, appears, I'm told, I'm not quite sure exactly where, 3 times in this painting in slightly different guises. A clue perhaps to the obsessive sexuality that would in time lead him to divorce her and marry his muse, Patricia Priest. This second marriage was disastrous in some fairly spectacular ways, which I shall summarize in a moment, and unconsummated. Patricia was already in a long-standing same-sex relationship with Dorothy Hepworth, both were artists, and the honeymoon consisted of Patricia and Dorothy setting off for the West Country by themselves while Stanley Spencer stayed behind in Kokum. And when I say disastrous, I mean in a variety of ways, not only for Spencer himself, but also for Hilda and for their 2 daughters. But I won't go into that this evening. When Priest got back from the West Country, she persuaded Spencer to sign over the deeds of his Kokum house, whereupon she promptly kicked him out and rented it for income. Within a couple of years, he was penniless and living in a bedsit in Swiss Cottage. And his response was to keep painting. And it was in the wake of all of this that he embarked on his Christ in the Wilderness paintings. This series of paintings then was produced during Spencer's own personal wilderness. And at a national level, he was living amidst the upheaval of the Second World War. 4 of the 8 paintings we have date from the opening months of the Second World War. Fortunately, better years were to come. Spencer's reputation grew throughout the 1950s. He was knighted in the year of his death, 1959. So that's a very brief bit of background. which I hope gives some kind of context to the paintings we're going to spend the rest of this session looking at. The origin story for the Christ in the Wilderness paintings involves, once again, his beloved Kokum. Looking at the panels in the ceiling of Kokum Church, Spencer told his niece that he wished to fill them, saying, this is a direct quote, "I suddenly seemed to tumble to the idea of trying to do the life of Christ in the wilderness. I felt, because you have not anything much in the actual life in the wilderness except temptation, that one has an excuse for imagining what his life, Jesus' life, might have been like." This quotation, by the way, is from archive material cited in Stephen Cottrell's book, Christ in the Wilderness, and anyone who knows that book will recognize the depth that this session owes to that work. I'm also drawing on reflections by Judy Gittoes, former Canon Chancellor of Guildford Cathedral. I feel I ought to honour my sources because I can in no way claim to be an expert on Spencer's work, but I can claim to have lived with them for many years and found them a fascinating source of reflection and insight. In his paintings, Spencer connects Jesus' time in the wilderness with some of his later sayings and teachings. I pondered a little bit on that on my Evensong sermon last Sunday evening. In particular, those that draw on the natural world, a theme that fascinates me in all kinds of ways. And this is just one of them. I'm fascinated by the interplay between the natural world and human culture in literature, in art, whatever. And the Spencer paintings are a great case in point. And this is Spencer's way of opening up for us new ways into understanding and reflecting on Jesus's identity and character, and the impact of those 40 days on what came next, and inviting us into further contemplation of our own relation to God and the world around us. Like Christ, I want to suggest we live with the tension in our own lives, often between delight in creation and the experience of wilderness and existential anxiety. In writings from the Tate Archive, Stanley Spencer says, "In Christ, God beholds his creation, and this time has a mysterious occasion to associate himself with it. In this visitation, he contemplates the many familiar, humble objects and places, the declivities, holes, pit banks, boulders, rocks, hills, fields, ditches, and so on. The thought of Christ considering all these seems to me to fulfill and consummate the life wishes and meaning of all these things." And Keith Bell writes that the wilderness paintings show Spencer seeking to re-establish through Christ his belief in humanity's oneness with the world. Christ is presented as if he were a pebble or both sides of a mountain, and the form of his body and his clothing often merges delicately with the shape of the ground. Spencer made sketches for 40 paintings, one for each day in the wilderness. What a shame that he didn't actually manage to complete all 40. But just 8 were completed, and we'll spend some time looking at each of them. It's an earthy series of images, full of rocks, wild beasts, and the tenderness of Christ abiding with them and attending to God. So just one or two more introductory remarks before we go into the paintings one by one. We speak in the Christian faith of Christ as the Word made flesh. And this is very much what we see in Spencer's painting. This is a very fleshly, dare one say it, even rather corpulent Jesus. In these paintings, Jesus is without human company, but very much sharing our humanity. He's confronting the stark reality of the wilderness. In his solitude, he's deeply attentive to his Heavenly Father. He's at ease with the richness of creation, but very aware, in Tennyson's famous phrase, that nature is red in tooth and claw. So let's go through the 8 one by one, not in the order that they were produced, but rather in a way that draws out the contrasts and the themes as we move through this season of Lent towards Holy Week and Easter Day. I'm going to offer a few comments and reflections on each of them, to which you are very welcome to add any comments or reflections of your own. And I'll try and keep an eye on the time as we do that, to make sure that we finish in time for any of you who might want to go on to Compline at 8:30. So, not the first painting to be produced, but I think it makes sense to start with this one, which is called Driven by the Spirit into the Wilderness. And I've got underneath the painting a text that we heard earlier in that gospel reading. So I don't know what you make of this image. It strikes me that there's a power and energy within it as Christ moves through a stony ground with hills and trees and greys and greens infused with light. Jesus is striding, determined, his feet firmly placed, his weight pushing forward, his arms outstretched, his hands firmly grasping the branches. The Greek word for spirit is the same as the Greek word for wind. And there is this notion of Jesus being driven into the wilderness. You can't actually see that it's windy through Jesus's hair. It looks still, but on the other hand, he's kind of, in the way he's planting his feet and grasping those branches, you can imagine that there's a gale going on. Richard Harries describes it as an inner gale, reflecting the wind of the Spirit that's driving him into the wilderness. This same Spirit that first descended, as we heard earlier, at Jesus's baptism to assure him of his identity as God's beloved Son, is now compelling him into the wilderness. So it strikes me that in this image we see both Jesus's vulnerability and his strength in the midst of the unpredictable expanse of creation. He doesn't know what's going to happen next. The vulnerability of God with us in all its strange beauty. So you might just like to spend a minute or two with this painting, and if anybody has any reflections upon it, what you see in it, please feel free to offer them. Otherwise, you're going to hear rather a lot of my voice this evening. Otherwise, we'll just spend a little bit of, if you don't know anything, we'll just spend a bit of time in silence with it. But please feel free.
I'm struck by the cross-shaped arms and the reference to the tree and what looks like rather blood red colouring under his feet. Sort of real overtones of the passion right at the beginning.
It's interesting, Catherine. We'll see that very much in another one of the paintings. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, there's not the first one that you'll see Christ with his arms wide open like that. I think that's very interesting that you spotted that. I think there's a lot in these paintings that is a kind of foreshadowing of what's to come. Absolutely.
I wonder what the significance is of the tree on the right being much sturdier than the little twig that he's sort of being pulled towards that thicker tree. And then it's just a very weak twig on the other side. I don't know if that represents, where he's coming from, where he's going. I don't know.
It's interesting, isn't it? I was talking about strength and vulnerability, and I don't know whether there's anything of that in those, but I think the force with which he's being driven, I think certainly requires a firmer branch to grasp onto. But yeah, no, that is a very striking difference, isn't it? That the twigs on the left don't look like they would hold you up very well, do they?
No.
It looks to me like the crown of thorns.
Yeah, interesting.
And I was struck, if you look at now let me see, what we see looking at the right breast of Jesus, but it would be his left breast. It looks almost like a woman's breast, and given his interest in sex and his rather complicated personal life, I wonder if that's a sort of, coming over to the feminine side. I don't know what you think of that, but it does look like a breast.
part of the fascination of evenings like this is that you always see there's far more that comes out of it than you've ever seen yourself. I mean, certainly one of the later images is extremely maternal.
Right.
And we'll come on to that. Yeah, no, that's
He also looks as if he's going uphill. You know, that left foot is much higher, and so he's pulling himself up. So he's actually rising up as well.
Yeah, no, sure, yeah. So it does look like that, doesn't it?
In all these pictures, he's rather podgy, isn't he?
He's very podgy. He's very podgy.
Yeah, is that true of the other things apart from this particular cycle in which he portrays Jesus?
They all look fair. He looks fairly podgy in all of these.
In all of these he does, but what about other ones?
Of other paintings by Spencer?
Yeah.
I'd need to go and check that, but I think Spencer does tend to pull. You know, I think this is representative. I think it's unusual in terms of portrayals of Christ in art.
Yeah.
Where he was, as I said earlier, there is this very much this pale, slender Galilean that you tend to see, or sometimes he's quite muscular. But I think it's pretty unusual to see such a generously proportioned man.
After 40 days in the wilderness?
Well, this is at the beginning, of course.
Yeah.
But yeah. Well, Mark never says, interestingly, that Mark's gospel never says that he fasted, interestingly.
Oh.
But you're right. He certainly doesn't seem to get any thinner during the paintings. I'll acknowledge that. So yeah.
Don't you think? Oh, don't you think he's like Christ in the Dream of the Rood, really hastening up towards the wilderness, hastening towards his fate, really?
No, I can absolutely see what you mean, Anne. That's,
yes.
Yeah, absolutely see that. Well, that's fascinating. That's what a rich set of reflections we've had already, and this is only one. It'd be interesting to see whether the other 7 draw as varied a set of responses as that. But just in case they do, I feel like we could spend longer with this one, but I perhaps ought to move on to the next one. If we got any time at the end, we can always come back to any images that seem particularly, resonant or be particularly arising to more reflections than others. But let's go on to the second one. So you might see what I was referring to in response to your question, Catherine, in this one. I said that Spencer in these paintings is often referencing sayings and teachings from Jesus's later ministry. Come on, then, somebody tell me what text this painting relates to. Sure,
Foxes have holes.
That's his letter, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you very much. So absolutely, and that is the title of this painting, Foxes Have Holes. This is one of the ones produced in 1939. So there's the text and another fox reference that Jesus makes. In the Gospels, Jesus talks about having nowhere to lay his head, and out here in the wilderness, this is literally true. Unlike the birds of the air or foxes in their dens. In this image, Jesus is in one way at home in this world, and yet there's a kind of restlessness. It strikes me in that posture. It's quite an awkward posture. Jesus hasn't come to the wilderness simply to escape, but to deepen his understanding of his call as God's son. And there are hints here that the way of reconciliation will involve walking the way of suffering. He'll be lifted up on a cross to draw the whole world to God. Perhaps we glimpse that, as Catherine drew our attention to in the opening painting, but in his body shape here, arms open wide, as they are in this painting, in quite a sort of angular way, but nonetheless open. And don't know what you make of the expression on Christ's face as he sits, stands, whatever posture he's in there. in the midst of those foxes. And with again, if we spend a minute or so with this one, and I'd again be fascinated to see what you make of any of that. If you look at Christ's hands, how different they are on the one side to the other.
He looks thirsty to me.
See, yeah,
exhausted. Yeah.
So it looks like quite a pained expression.
Yeah.
Anthony, the second quotation is slightly covered over by your picture or whoever's speaking. Go and tell that fox. What's the rest of it?
Goodness, I had to get up my Bible to remember exactly what Jesus went and what they wanted him to go and tell Herod. So,
but the only other word on
says
is
go tell that fox Herod. Yes. Yeah. Sorry. Yes, I see that now. Now I know what the H is for. I can.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's not. He doesn't think. Yes, he doesn't think of foxes as particularly friendly. Obviously, if he uses that as his reference for Herod.
Well, I was getting in the two quotes. Yeah, the quote is, "Go and tell that fox for me. Listen, I'm casting out demons and performing cures, and on the third day I finish my work." That's the sort of full quote. So, as far as I'm aware, those are the two references that Jesus makes to foxes in the New Testament. So, I thought for completion, I'd give you both. So it's clearly the first one of those texts that Spencer is referencing in this painting. You think they look quite friendly?
Yeah, in this picture, I think they look.
They look like the kind of foxes they look like Kokum foxes to me.
Well, they just look interested in him, don't they? You know, what's this chap doing here then? Especially the one popping up in the front.
They look as though he looks as though he's embracing them, though. He looks around them.
There is that, and embrace. It was not the last time we'll see Christ embracing, and there is a kind of embrace there, and
well, the foxes,
arms open wide gesture.
The foxes were hunted by humankind at that time, and perhaps that's the symbolism of that. I personally think they're rather beautiful creatures with rather lovely tails, but perhaps Spencer felt, that they were hunted as Christ was hunted.
Surely, but they were also hunters, of course, as is referenced in that second one. They are predators, but like so many animal predators, have also been hunted by humans.
Do you know why his hands are so different, Anthony?
No, I find that quite intriguing as to how different they are. Can you make anything of that?
Well, I think his left hand looks almost as if it's a dead hand. It's very thin and it's very pale. It's almost, but he's not holding it out for the nails or anything like that, whereas his right hand is very fleshy and very colourful, and long fingers. They're such a contrast.
They are. I mean, whether it's too easy to see that as a kind of foreshadowing again of the cross, I don't know, but it certainly does look like that hand does not look in good shape.
I'm trying to work out the expression on his face. Yes, it could be he's tired, but it could be there's an inner acceptance of where he finds himself at that particular moment. Not resignation. It's more energetic than that. But
I think he's panting for a drink. I
find it hard to tell. I mean, I think.
Yeah, it is hard.
Yeah, he could. Some of the expressions in these paintings are pretty easy to read, I would say. You can, but some of them really aren't. And there's a huge variety of expression as we go through as we go through the paintings, as we'll see. And that one is hard to read, to my mind.
You could look at it and see it as thick lips closed, not an open mouth. If you actually look at it, close to. It doesn't necessarily an open mouth with a tongue showing, which is a rather ugly kind of expression. It could be just, and if you look at it as lips, it's very relaxed actually and contemplative. His eyes change then.
He certainly looks like he comes from the Middle East.
Well, that's good, isn't it? For once.
Well,
Well, I mean that's that. I was referencing the kind of I was referencing the pale Galilean, rather Western Jesus that we see in a lot of paintings. So he does look more authentically Middle Eastern here. Yeah. There's a whole separate talk to be given about what Jesus is thought to look like, and all that. We won't attempt that this evening.
I was just going to say, I can really relate to this posture as a pet owner, because often one has to sort of get out of the way or sit or lie awkwardly in order to accommodate an animal. And there's a real sense that he is in their place.
Yes.
And he's having to accommodate them.
To them.
And although he is resting, he literally can't lay his head, although he's trying to kind of compose the rest of himself. And I don't know whether I'm taking this too far, but it feels as if it's a real sort of in this world, but not of it kind of setting. He's not part of where he is.
Yes. Fascinating.
It is odd. Because in some ways he's definitely relaxing if you look at it in one way. And yet in another, he looks really awkward having his knee underneath, his foot under his, but I mean, people do sit like that, don't they, when they're on the floor. And he does have some,
it looks to me like he's shaping, his body shape is in relation to the shape of the landscapes where the foxes are. There's even those two kind of, I don't know, bits of wood or branches that he's got his arm
around.
It's,
The roots behind are very spooky.
Yeah, fascinating. I feel like we could probably be spending longer than we've got on these. So that we go through them. Let's go on to the next one. And of course, we may find that some we don't have as much to say. Let's see. So this is rather different, very different expression again. One of the early paintings. So here's Jesus kneeling on the earth. It's if you imagine the old-fashioned way that people were encouraged to kneel by their bedside to say their prayers, it's almost that kind of posture.
It's a robin, isn't it?
But in this occasion, Jesus is doing it on a mountaintop.
Yes.
And eyes raised, hands pointing beyond. So it's a kind of posture of petition and attention and encounter.
It's quite Lord, give me strength, isn't it?
That's not the way Jesus would have prayed, is it?
No.
Why not?
He would have had hands open.
Well, yeah, maybe.
Do the Jews pray? Do the Jews pray open-handed? I don't know.
Yeah.
Muslims do, but
well, we could see in this an image of ourselves at prayer as well. I mean, it strikes me that you could reflect quite a lot about our own attempts at praying with this particular image. It looks a very sort of human image of prayer to me, in which you can see something of the sort of effort involved in praying, about how easy it is to get distracted by the aches of our bodies, what's going on in our lives, the things we have to do, about how you can be at loss for words in prayer. But nonetheless, there's a sense that this is about encounter, and that this is something basic like breathing that Jesus needs to do, and that arguably all of us need to do. And in this way, we might both find God and find ourselves, as Jesus prays with open eyes.
Yes.
Hands closed, but open eyes.
Yeah.
With his, pressed against this rock on a mountain, which is, and mountains are often places which are, where you go to find the presence of God in Scripture. So, and he fills the canvas in this one, and it's just him and the rock. It's a kind of close up. What do you make of this one?
I think the robe is almost rock-like. It's almost like sculpture.
It's kind of merging into the rock.
Yes, sculpture to me.
Looks pretty solid, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
And the rock's like an altar.
Yes.
Yeah, just like an altar. Yeah. It's almost like the kind of altar you could imagine the Abraham and Isaac.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Yeah. It's got marks in it.
You
could be his bed.
Yeah.
You could see some blood from his left wrist, like we thought we saw some from his
very
foot.
earth, that sort of, I don't know whether that is, or whether it's just earthy or bloody or whatever. There's something, as I in my title for this evening says, there's a lot of earthiness in these images.
I think his expression in his face looks as if he's not pleading with God, but asking God for a lot of help at the moment.
Yeah.
I think he knows what's coming, and I think he's asking for some, he's in need of some courage and some support.
Okay.
I think that's what he's asking for.
Yeah, interesting. Again, it's a very intriguing expression. Any other reflections on this one?
I wonder if it's a foreshadowing of the Garden of Gethsemane.
Yeah, no, like I can see why you'd say that. Absolutely, yeah. We've just been speaking about Jesus seeking strength, and for what's to come or whatever. That would very much fit.
And
another example, perhaps, of the foreshadowing you see in these paintings.
And the eyes don't look confident; they look very unconfident to me.
Yeah,
uncertainty, fear, almost.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is a properly human Christ, which is the sense that you get in the letter to the Hebrews, that this is a real testing. It's not some sort of it's not some experience that he just skates through and it's easy. I've paired this with one which in which Jesus is also obviously praying, but has actually a rather different sense to it. So perhaps I'll go on to that one, which is this is a different way of putting holding yourself and hands not together in this one. Rising from sleep in the morning. I find this absolutely fascinating painting, and if that last posture seemed a little bit conventional in terms of dealing by this is anything but. It's an extraordinary image of the beginning of a day. I mean, I spoke about Spencer's war experiences. Is it too fanciful to see?
Yeah, a crater.
Jesus as a rising out of some kind of crater.
Yes.
And so in solidarity with our messy, complex, fragile humanity. But somehow you can also see in this that he's utterly rooted in God. That in this painting, at least, he feels like a beloved son reaching upwards in trust and in love. I think there's a very different expression on his face in this one to the last one. I don't know whether you'd go with that.
Yeah.
And it strikes me that in his future ministry, as Jesus walked his land and met with a whole variety of people and with challenge and occasionally with encouragement, but with so many setbacks and all that he did, that everything that he did depended on moments of prayer and focus like this. And in a way, there's a kind of invitation for all of us to share in this pattern of a prayerful life in which we sort of rise from sleep in the morning with trust in God, in a way that, you know, is both challenging and life-giving.
I think in both this and the previous one, you can see there's a relationship between him and the one that he's praying to.
Yeah, absolutely, you can.
It's rather lovely the way his robe is mirrored by the landscape around him, I think.
It is. Yes. I mean, I was...
Or the other way around. The landscape around him is mirrored by his robe.
Yeah, there's so much in which he's, you know, he's really, he's at one with the landscape, and his body is kind of rid. And I was talking about, you know, there's a kind of invitation for the viewer to kind of share in this kind of life and what the fruits of this kind of life might be. And there's just one more quote from Spencer himself in relation to this painting. This is the quote: "I think I was perhaps thinking of a flower opening."
Yes, exactly.
It's very unrealistic, actually, for a robe. If he was actually wearing the robe that you see him in, it would not have that much material in it. He's deliberately exaggerated that to make this flower-like structure.
But what is the date of this picture?
This one is 1940.
Exactly.
So yeah.
It's like God, Jesus, is at the center of the hell that is war.
Yeah.
You know, he's this white, pure sort of flower, like, you know, in connection with God, in the center of the horrible pit that is war. Yes.
Absolutely. So there's both the crater and the war, but there's also the kind of sense of the flower and the all of that. So which is those kind of which is an extraordinary range of reference in one very striking image.
Yes,
it's very positive and exudes hope, I think.
Yeah. But it's hope that's also that is not unaware of the horror in the world.
Yes.
It's in touch with that. So it's not you know, which I always think is that's the kind of hope that actually means something.
Yes.
If it's not rose-tinted spectacles, it's actually hope that's rooted in reality and rooted doesn't turn away from the horrors of the world.
It's not naive hope.
No, exactly. Yeah. Now I'm going to move on because I'm aware that it's approaching past, and so I need to. Speaking of flowers,
of
a flower. Here's a very different one. So give me the text.
Lilies of the field.
Lilies of the field.
Thank you very much. Okay, so yes, absolutely. Consider the Lilies from 1939. So you know, very different. This is a kind of rich and earthy painting with the fingers of a particularly rotund Christ plunged into the soil. Eyes fixed not on exotic perfume lilies, but the ordinary daisy. So here's the Creator rejoicing in creation.
Yeah.
Not in cosmic grandeur, but in intimate beauty. And just one more thing to say about this one from me, that Spencer, I understand, was inspired by a child crawling on the grass. And he said of this auspicious moment that it gave a sense of the Creator brooding over his creation, and the analogy between what a baby might do and what God might do is near in its feeling, which is quite an interesting reflection from Spencer's. So that this is more of an image of playful wonder and curiosity and attention and the sustained loving gaze of God. So again, very different.
I mean, when I first saw that, I thought that was a baby leopard or something in the forefront of the picture. But I mean, it's obviously not a baby leopard. Is it leopard spots? What is that meant to be?
It is odd.
I think that's sort of plants and seeds and all of that.
Yeah,
I think so.
Odd though, very odd. Strange.
There's a great feeling of the attention that he's giving to creation.
Absolutely, yeah. There really is. Now I'm going to jump on because we've got 3 more to go.
Right.
And text, please.
Oh, this is lovely.
Yes, the hen.
Text.
Yeah.
Beg your pardon.
Gather your children. Yes.
Lovely.
Oh yeah, hen gathers her brood under her wings. Yeah.
This is much later. Actually, it's 1954. So a happier time in Spencer's in Spencer's life, and we had something from June earlier about the maternal aspects of Jesus, and here is Jesus lying alongside a mother hen, tenderly gathering her chickens, brooding over them. So an image of sheltering and embrace. Again, the sort of posture of Jesus's body is very striking and interesting. And so Jesus offering a place of safety and welcome, but it's not an enclosed circle. There's a space in, and Stephen Cottrell observes that the little bird flying in there is he thinks not a chicken or a hen, but a different kind of bird, and that in this sense you can see that everybody can find welcome in there. But there are also chickens outside the embrace. So life is not all about being within the embrace of God. It's also about venturing forth or whatever. So you've got that kind of dichotomy in this painting. So
he's swapped hands, hasn't he? This time it's his right hand, which is strong, and his left hand, which is more effete. It's paler.
Sure.
I don't know what that's about.
Yeah, it wasn't. But he's got very little feet compared to the size of his right hand.
But the arms and hands in the last one were really puny. The ones that he was stretching upwards with nothing like as strong as these. It's interesting, isn't it? He does it different every time.
Yeah, they are. You can see the continuities, but they're big differences.
Yeah.
I see that little bird is either a sparrow or a robin, actually.
Again, maybe another Kokum reference. It does look like one of those, but it just I can see what Stephen Cottrell says. It doesn't look like a chick.
No, it's not a chicken. It's a bird.
No.
I don't think chicks can fly anyway. So yeah, I think this is one of these that I've seen most often reproduced. Perhaps it's the most comfortable one in a way, and interesting that it does come from a more comfortable period of Spencer's life.
And the hair, the hair and beard.
Very glum. I think he looks very glum.
He looks what? Sorry.
Yeah.
He looks what? Glum. Did somebody say glum?
Yeah, I thought she did.
Yeah.
He does look a bit fed up, really. Expression. Strange.
And the hair and beard.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't really noticed that.
A hat, don't they?
I like the way he's giving space for the big mother hen and for all the other little fledglings.
Exactly. Yeah.
They can be themselves because there is that space.
Indeed.
And are we are rather prejudiced about large bodies, and this is therefore a much more attractive figure, really, isn't it, altogether? Because we do find it, we are programmed to find it more attractive.
Yes, he doesn't look as large as in that the Lilies of the Field one.
That's right.
There are two more. So I'm going to.
Oh my goodness!
This is something darker this time.
Wow!
Oh, don't like it at all. No.
Yeah. Well, this is the more
detail.
This is a more challenging one, perhaps. This is from 1943.
Right.
So for some reason, Spencer called it eagles, but I'm sure he's referencing the text that you can see on the screen, which refers to vultures. So perhaps those birds, as he's drawn them, do look more like eagles and vultures. So
in 1943, eagles would be like the Germans, the Nazis, wouldn't they? Eagle.
Yeah, no, good. That's very interesting, Anne. Yeah, no,
Would be a
thought of that.
reference.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a very
especially 1943, which
interesting
is
thought.
really a pivotal.
And certainly this is the sort of.
And
so here you've got cruelty and violence and death.
Yes.
And so the life cycle is not, people talk about the circle of life as though it's something all cozy, but this is the nature red in tooth and claw and violence and death or whatever.
What is your interpretation of Christ's turned away head?
Yeah,
he looks as though he's looking at somebody. He looks as though somebody is sort of is worried about somebody who's coming up towards him.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's aware of the horror, certainly, but he's not focused on it. He's looking beyond it.
Exactly, yes.
Or if
I think it's very interesting.
If those beasts represent the Nazis, I mean, he looks very Jewish in that. That's another reason of that.
He does, you're right.
He's turning
He does.
away.
That he looks particularly Middle Eastern in that one. That's very true.
I don't like it, but he's not turning the vultures away, is he?
No,
he's allowing them to do whatever it is.
They do.
Yeah.
Well, they have to, don't they? It is the circle of life.
Yeah.
That twig behind him.
Yeah, and that's spicy.
The twig behind him looks like the puny twig from the beginning.
Yeah.
Broken off. It's broken off.
A broken off branch. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Fragility once again. Yeah. And there's one more.
Right.
So this is the last one.
Oh, I like that one. It's lovely. Yeah.
So and so this is I'll give you in the interest of speed. I'll give you the text.
Yes.
So this is the scorpion.
Yes.
From 1939 again. So arguably an image of God the Creator dwelling amongst us without compromise, and a scorpion usually seen as an aggressor with a wounding sting or fatal venom. And yet this scorpion is held in the hands of Jesus in a tender and loving way. He doesn't crush or destroy it.
No.
So and maybe as we approach Holy Week, we will become increasingly aware that Jesus will indeed destroy the sting of death, whatever. So there's something of that in this, and again, sort of more foreshadowing, perhaps, of what is to come, and what Jesus will do. Later in his ministry. So I find that a very striking image. What do you make of that one?
I find it difficult to believe.
They're none of them very believable, Richard.
I mean, whoever you are you going to pick up a scorpion in your hand?
No way.
No. Well, I mean, in my sermon at Evensong last week, I spoke a lot about the kind of the vision of God's new age, in which the wolf will lie down with the lamb, in which the predators are no longer predators, and the whole kind of the way the whole world is working is recast. And so maybe there's something of that in some of these, a vision of the restoring and reordering of creation.
Yeah,
I have given you authority to tread on snakes and scorpions. That's not very kind, is it?
No, it's not. Yeah, I was wondering whether anybody would spot that. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I think this is rather different. Not about treading on scorpions, but actually seeing even a scorpion as is God's creature, and and there's value in it.
There's another one on the ground, isn't there, by his right foot?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, I suppose it would hurt on you if you normally.
Yeah.
Didn't kill it.
But it wouldn't. Well, presumably it wouldn't hurt him.
So I've got one quotation for you from Julie Gittos, and that's and I'll end with it because I'm aware of that our time is nearly up. And Julie Gittos writes this: in the wilderness, Christ comes to a deeper understanding of how he is as God's beloved son, and he commits himself to use his power not to coerce or manipulate or dazzle. Instead, he chooses to love. And we too are invited into this deep, prayerful attention to God, not removing ourselves from the messy, sometimes brutal complexity of the world, but nor do we deny ourselves true delight in the beauty and abundance, the fragility and the resilience of creation. So that's a sort of final quote to bring, with somebody else's words, all that I wanted to share with you in relation to these images. So we've only got a minute or two left, but if there's anything else anybody wanted to say about any of these, you're most welcome. And I have to say I found all the reflections this evening very rich and helpful, and and I'll go away and think more about these paintings of the light on.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anthony. Fascinating.
Yes.
And if these are on the roof of Standham Church, we should have a trip when we can.
Well, unfortunately, they were. I don't know exactly how this happened, but they seem to have been brought up by. I think you have to travel to the Gallery of Western Australia in Perth to see these nowadays.
Oh no! That's dreadful.
So yeah.
Game on.
So quite how that happened, I'm not sure.
Oh.
So,
and look at Christ's left foot on this. He even has a black toenail.
Oh yes.
Which is a very sort of human thing.
Knocked it on a rock.
I hadn't noticed that before, June. I can see that. Yes, yeah, no, absolutely, yeah.
I think his hands are really powerful.
Mm.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this. I think it's been wonderful. We often talk about our journey through the wilderness, but I think this has been really helpful, having something to think and give us some signposts on our Lenten journey. And thank you so much for giving up your time to provide us with all this.
Wonderful.
Hugely
Excellent.
Thank you very much. Just very briefly, next week, Katie Hounsell-Robert, near neighbour of the cathedral and art critic, will be talking to us about the contemporary artist Mark Casolet's London Stations of the Cross. So
lovely.
Then you can.
Thank you.
Look forward to that.
Yes.
Thank you.
Lovely.
Thank you all.
Everyone.
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Good night. Bye.
Bye.